who are very clearly come from the ranch and the farm, judging from your rough homespun attire and the thick layer of trail dust upon your bodies, that you have come to improve yourselves. And this is something that we as Americans can do. If I were a European and my father had not been a gentleman, then being a gentleman would not for me be an option. It doesn't matter how much money I might have. If I didn't have the proper birth, then I would always be a low-born tradesman or mechanical or something like that. But in America, it's different. In America, you can apply yourself with hard work, with industry, and with luck. You can acquire that one thing that all Americans most desire: money. With money, you can purchase the good house, you can purchase the clothes, you can afford the proper wife, and you can purchase yourself a lovely set of good manners to go with the fact that you are now a lady or a gentleman. Now, in the traditional sense, a gentleman is someone who does not work with his hands or in trade. A gentleman, the best sort of gentleman, is someone whose profession consists of sitting at home and letting people pay him rent. While he goes to all the best parties, he wears the most fashionable clothes, and he goes on the grand tour of France and Italy. In America, of course, it's somewhat different, and if you have made your way in the world, then the time has, and you have acquired all the physical attributes of a gentleman, it is time to acquire the behavior of a gentleman. There are old etiquette books from the 18th century, from the age of aristocrats and powdered wigs and knee breeches, and they are more or less just biographies of delightful ladies and gentlemen, and how wonderful it was to go to a party with them, because they had such clever conversation and such delightful manners. We Americans, on the other hand, here in the industrial age of the 19th century, our etiquette books are checklists. They are very clear statements that you must do A and B and C, and you will wear this and you will wear that. I am wearing a frock suit. This is the highest level of dress for daytime for a gentleman, and it includes a beaver top hat, gloves, and a walking stick. This is the attire of a judge, of a senator, of a banker, of a preacher, of a faro dealer, or of any other sort of person of renown and respect in the community. There are also, below this, there is a less formal dress. It's called a business suit or a sack suit. The British call it a lounge suit. This is a three-piece suit: trousers, vest, coat, loosely cut coat, worn with a bowler hat or something along those lines. Any number of hats. Any hat, in fact, except a top hat. Now, when I am dressed like this, you can see that unlike this fellow here, I am not really properly attired to muck out a stable. This is not clothing for hard labor. This clothing says that I gain my wealth by my brain and not my brawn. So, You'll note it is a heavy wool. It is somewhat confining. The shoulders are cut so as to pull them back, causing my shoulders to go back, my chest to go out. My collar will tend to punish me if my head goes much below the horizontal. So I must keep my head up, and I must keep my shoulders back and my back straight. And if I'm carrying a walking stick, it's quite easy. In fact, anything I do becomes a pose. Upon my head, I have the most useless and absurd thing any man in history has ever placed upon his head, with the exception of certain pieces of military headgear. So, this brim provides absolutely no protection from the sun. If I get caught in a rainstorm, the nap of the hat will be ruined. If I get caught in a high wind, it will be blown off. It's also knocked off by low branches, and I tend to bump into low doorways. If I am wearing it in the wintertime, every boy believes it is bound in duty to knock it off my head with a snowball. But I wear it anyway, because it is the badge of my status as a gentleman. And it is important that you must look the part. I don't care what you do behind closed doors. That is not any matter to me. But what matters is what happens as soon as you step out your door. Then you are like an actor on the stage. You must be at your best. You never go out half-dressed. You never go out looking anything but the best that you can manage. Because the key is you must always present your best face to the world. Not only for your own self-respect, but it is a way of respecting the world and adding to the general tone of society that you contribute to it by your proper presentation and do not detract from it by slovenliness and poor behavior. This applies equally well to women. In fact, perhaps even more so, a lady, which is to say, as opposed to a woman is someone who works for a living, which would probably be 90% of the female sex in this nation. That 10% who do not need to make their living farming or doing laundry or any of those other manual pursuits, they dress in such a way that they are completely ornamental. They are of no practical use whatever. However, a well-turned-out lady is a well-turned-out wife reflects very well upon her husband. And also, a lady in fashionable attire is quite incapable of looking after herself and must be waited on by men or servants. And now I will leave it to my wife to talk a little bit about a lady's attire and how a lady carries herself.
As you can see, my attire, like my husband's, prevents me from doing much of anything. One is wearing one's stays, one cannot bend down to pick anything up. One cannot scrub floors or work in the fields. One is mostly decorative. A lady always wears a hat and gloves. And when she walks, and you'll note that I'm wearing the fashion of this decade, the bustle. She does not want to call too much attention, to the bustle. She does not want to walk like a duck or a goose. She's never in a hurry, and she doesn't want to take big strides like a man and bounce up and down. She wants to walk smoothly and elegantly. And unlike my husband, who walked down the street looking everyone in the eye, a lady doesn't. Because if a lady were to walk up to a gentleman and catch his eye, well, what talk there would be. They would think she was some common strumpet. But she wishes to walk smoothly and leisurely. And as my husband has said, a lady doesn't go out into the streets alone. She'll have a gentleman, a servant, or even another lady accompany her. But again, walking through the streets on your own will also elicit comment. When one goes upstairs, or when one is walking, one doesn't fuss too much with one's skirts. One doesn't pick them up. If you're going up a step, if you pull your skirt ahead of you and maybe up just a little, you're not going to catch it with your feet. But you don't want to hike them up and display everything you have underneath them. When you sit down, you don't want to flop into the chair. You want to sink gently. And because the bustle takes up a certain amount of space behind you, these days we sit rather at a slant. Like so.
Perch like a bird.
Perch like a bird. And you don't lean against the back of the chair or lean on the armrests. That is not attractive. It looks rather vulgar.
Now, when a man walks, he walks with a strong, even stride. With a stride that says, "It is the 19th century. I'm a rich white American, and I rule the world." And as my wife pointed out, I'm not afraid to look any man in the eye. Now, it is important that the stride be smooth. I do not waddle. I do not strut. I walk smoothly, and if I have a walking stick, which I highly recommend, it adds to the effect. Though you must be careful when you have a stick that you do not become a hazard to the community. And it is also a very useful thing when escorting a lady. If some ruffian upon the street should give offense, the walking stick is a very effective tool for immediate retribution and correction. Now, this is the Academy of Genteel Behavior. In that academy, one is not permitted to simply sit in the back of the room, nodding off, while some stuffed shirt goes on and on and on. No, you must participate. So, we need a brace of volunteers. We need a man and a woman. Have we any volunteers? We need an adult. Well, he'll pass. Excellent, thank you. Yes, please. All right, and I shall equip you with your... You, sir, here's your chapeau. You should wear no other hat, sir. It entirely agrees with your physiognomy. And your stick, sir. Now, we will ask you, sir, to stroll over there and back. And we will all critique you. And back, sir. Not bad. Not bad. Perhaps you could be a little more easy in your gait.
The shoulders back a little.
Back a little bit more, but it is essential, as in all manner of good manners, you must work extremely hard and be very precise about looking like you're not working at all. And now, since I would not dream of offering correction to a lady, we will ask this lady to do the same, and my wife will offer correction.
Oh dear, okay, so you want to...
You just walk.
Oh,
You could put the parasol over your shoulder. Yes, very good.
this?
Yes. Oh, there's a swing in the hip there.
Oh, try again.
It does take a certain amount of practice. That's a bit timid, though. Very modest. Very good.
All right, now that you have learned to walk,
I'm not so sure.
it is time to move on. It is time for an introduction. And sir, what is your name?
My name, good sir,
Yes?
is William Lavoy.
Mr. Lavoy.
Yes, sir.
We will leave out the William.
Okay.
Since we are not well enough acquainted to use first
First
names.
name, just surname.
Yes. And you will be Mr. Lavoy. However, if we get to know each other quite well, some years from now, you may call me Nelson, and I'll call you Lavoy. And your name, madam?
Robin.
Miss
Mrs. Robin Palmer.
Palmer.
Yes.
Mrs. Palmer. So, we have Mr. Lavoy and Mrs. Palmer. So, I will now make an introduction. Introductions are essential in good society because you never know when you encounter someone in the hustle bustle of the world what sort of person they might be. They might be this fellow might be some sort of cad or rascal or knave, and a woman might regret having met him. And this woman certainly is not, but might be a woman that a gentleman will regret having met. So that the introduction is a form of vouching for the good character of the people being introduced. So I am saying that this person is a man of good character, and this is a lady of good character, and if in fact subsequent events prove this to be incorrect, they will remember who introduced them. And word will get about that Nelson out there introduces cads and rascals into society. And by association, I too must be a cad and a rascal. And it would do great harm to my reputation. And reputation is everything. Reputation, once lost, cannot be retrieved. A man who gets a bad reputation, which usually means for dishonesty, will never find a proper job. And a woman who gets a bad reputation, which usually relates to immorality, will never find a proper marriage or situation in life. Which, by the way, is one of the reasons that the West is such a wonderful invention. Because out West, it is a very particular point of etiquette that you never ask a person any kind of personal question, ever. This includes their name. It is perfectly acceptable in the West for two men to ride the trail together for months at a time without ever knowing each other's name. They might have something they call one another, but the name, and especially the reason you came out west, is never a point that you are allowed to inquire. Part of this, of course, is because many people have come out to the west to escape a bad reputation, and being proper 19th century people, if in fact I have been keeping company with this fellow for a year, and then find out that in fact he had deserted his family and left them destitute, and he is a cad and a rascal, I would then no longer be able to associate with him, even though I might be an axe murderer. but there are principles that must be observed. They don't have to be observed, however, if I never find out. So it's far better for the world out here in the West that we remain as ignorant of each other's past as possible. So, having said that, I will now make an introduction. And I'm sorry, but I've Palmer.
Palmer,
yes.
Palmer, yes.
I will introduce the gentleman to the lady, because the lady, being of a higher social station, is the one who is to whom people are presented. The only time a lady is presented to a gentleman would be if the gentleman was a particularly important fellow, a senator, a president, a general, or something like that. So, I will say, Mrs. Palmer, allow me to present Mr. Lavoie. And and there should be some pleasantry, I'm very pleased to meet you. Good afternoon.
How do you do?
That was excellent. I should point out that the question, how do you do, does not require an answer. In fact, it's entirely appropriate to answer, how do you do, with, how do you do? And also, I commend the lady on not presenting her hand. Ladies and gentlemen may take hands, but it is particular honor if a lady offers her hand to a gentleman. And it is not done in the manner of put your hand back on for a moment, a manly handshake. It is done thus.
Oh, Mr. No.
This is just a momentary grasping of the fingers. And they also did a proper bow. Now, of the bow, we are not a bunch of Europeans. We don't do that. We certainly aren't Frenchmen, and we don't kiss hands. And it is not a ballroom where things are much more formal, and we would do formal bows and curtsies thus. No, this is the street, and in the street it is sufficient to simply give an inclination of the head, and as Mr. Lavoie had quite properly done, remove the hat. Now, they have been introduced. It is time for them to walk. Because, of course, the lady must be escorted as she is out and about. Now, the lady, and I noticed, I was about to commend you on not doing that, sir.
I was looking askance.
Yes, the gentleman never assumes the lady wants to take his arm, because it is the lady's decision. And if the gentleman sticks his elbow out there and the lady didn't want to take his arm, then it's flapping around there like a plucked chicken. And that would be awkward. And the worst possible fate anyone can suffer is to look awkward. So the arm is close enough that if the lady wishes to take it, she may put tap her fingers on the inside of the elbow, at which moment the elbow automatically assumes the position, and the lady takes his arm. And for the purposes of this exercise, please take his arm. Have you felt it? Ah. There you go.
Should we try that again?
Yes, try it again. So as you feel the tap on the inside of your arm, there you go. Perfect. Now you will stroll down the avenue discussing matters of no importance. Ladies and gentlemen, never discuss anything of importance. The weather, people they've recently met, and so forth is fine. But remember, ladies do not have opinions. If a lady has an opinion, the gentleman would just as soon not hear it.
Here, here.
So, please, walk down and back, discussing nothing of importance.
Beautiful day today. There are no clouds in the sky today. Did you notice that? And how long have you known Walter?
Very well done. And I wanted to point out that in all of this, Mrs. Nelson and I, of course, if you noticed, have never used our Christian name. In public, when I am out in the public sphere, when we are out in the public sphere, it's always Mr. Nelson and Mrs. Nelson. I never call her Sheila, as if you have some intimacy with her and you know who I'm talking about. No, it is always Mrs. Nelson. Of course, it is never Snooky Ookum. We never subject you to that sort of intimacy. Now, we have a few more minutes. We could go on for hours about proper deportment, and you people could certainly use it. But as we only have a few more minutes, we will entertain your questions. Must certainly have.
When?
Paris, I imagine.
I imagine, yes. It is very interesting. In the beginning of the 1870s, after the 1860s, where hoop skirts had reached absurd proportions, the fashion went to an A-line, possibly with a train. And perhaps it was the train that made women think, oh, that's in the way, I'll just lift it up, which makes sort of a little bunching back here. Someone thought that it was attractive. They built on that. By the middle of the 1870s, you've got a bustle about like this. The 80s goes to extremes with the bustle again. They stick way out. In fact, in Europe, court dresses, it looks like women are dragging a sofa behind them. They're just ridiculous. It looks like there must be dwarves or something supporting this bustle, or wheels or something. But yes, it is interesting how shapes kind of flow from one to another. But by mid-70s, this is what we're wearing.
I should like to point, hesitating to offer correction, but it's not women who decide these things. It's men. It's men in Paris who decide what women all around the world will be wearing next year. Mr. Worth being one of the most influential, that decide this year women are shaped thus, and they have bustles this year because I say so.
Yes, and oh, how big will their waists be this year? Well, let's make them smaller and smaller and smaller.
Yes.
Until the 1890s, 1900s. All the fashion plates show women with waists this big around, and I'm sure some of them came close, even if they had to remove a rib.
But with men, it's far more. Fashion changes far more slowly. There are certain fashions that young men take up that have very brief lives. Yesterday, my wife and I were wearing the clothing of the 1860s. She had a full hoop. She was completely different. Me, I wore black trousers and a black bow tie. And I was dressed for the 1860s. 1870s, I'm now wearing charcoal gray striped trousers and a four-in-hand tie and a Windsor knotted tie. And I'm still wearing the same shirt, the same vest, the same coat. I could continue to wear almost this exact outfit up until about 1920, with only changes of collar and tie. Because men work very much on the principle of it still fits, and some poof in Paris is not going to tell me that I can't wear it anymore.
You must explain poop.
There are children present. I will not define my terms. Yes, sir.
What, I guess I'm looking for an oversimplified answer, but what became of these genteel manners? Did they disappear when Queen Victoria died?
No, it's interesting that at the beginning of the 19th century, shortly after the American Revolution, there was this concept of Republican manners. And the Republican manners, and I'm not speaking about the political party, but the idea of free-born Americans regarded fine manners as being very effete, corrupt, and they thought that people should be treated, everyone should be treated equally, and that generally meant treated badly. So people in what we would call the service professions tended to be very short and very rude, and essentially work on the principle that I don't care if I rely on you to pay my salary. I'm as good a man as you are. And there were some very scandalizing books written by Europeans visiting America going on about the terribly rough ways of Americans. And Americans started getting very self-conscious about it. And this also moved with the Industrial Revolution and the change of the economy and the growth of cities and this class of well-to-do people who wanted to dress well and act well. So that by the end of the 19th century, you actually have this growth of this middle-class manners so that it starts to make its way down the whole range of society so that people in farmhouses feel that they need to put their coat on to go to the dinner table, which they wouldn't have felt 100 years before. But then, after the First World War, you had the 1920s. Manners changed. Women are liberated. Then,
But there are still handbooks on manners.
yes, there still are today. And then they find a new normal, which continues, which settles down about the 30s. And then we get to the 60s, and it all changes again.
Yeah. We're
And,
not doing anything the way our parents did, because our parents are awful.
yes, which of course was very much the view of the people in the 1920s, who blamed their parents for the First World War.
Except in the 60s, they decided, well, we're not going to make a new set of rules, we're just going to do whatever we feel like. And I think a lot of people were kind of set adrift by that. Because
Yes.
people no longer knew how to behave toward each other.
They still don't. Yeah, we're all
filled in yet.
very confused about what proper behavior is.
Well, you've educated us. Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes.
Are there any special considerations when introducing a gentleman to a lady afflicted with the brain fever?
I would assume, yes, the lady afflicted with the brain fever would not be out upon the street. She would be in her bed. And the only gentleman to which she would be introduced would be a physician or a priest.
And frankly, if you have any sort of affliction like that, you're probably not going to be allowed out in public.
No. No, yes, disease, if you are diseased, you immediately take to your bed, and you either get well or you die.
Or if you have any sort of affliction, it's not necessarily catching. But if you have any sort of handicap, they don't want people to see you.
Right, yes. The notion of you always present your best self to the world. If you are incapable of doing that, if you have a palsy or something like that, then you will probably just never go out. So I had over here.
Are you really talking about mannerism instead of behavior? Sounds more like mannerism.
Well, there's a whole range of what we call manners. I mean, and one of the things about the etiquette books that I find very interesting, if you look at a 19th century etiquette book, some of it is very particular to that time and place. 90% of it is common courtesy. It's don't eat with your mouth open. It's don't interrupt people when they're talking. if you're a house guest, don't be a bother. It's very simple, common courtesy things. And then laid upon that are these very, what we now call Victorian notions of how to behave. But the underlying part of that is good manners, and it's in fact the sort of, everyone has manners. Even rough-hewn country folk like yourself have common courtesy. And there's things like if visiting is very important on the farm. It's not ritualized, there are no cards, but people visit each other, and you sit down, you walk into someone's cabin and plant yourself down, and if he doesn't immediately produce a jug of whiskey, wipe off the rim with his shirt sleeve and plop it down in front of you, then he obviously would rather you hadn't come. So every society has a notion of good behavior, good manners, but the sort of middle class behavior, the refined manners, was sort of a veneer laid on top of of common courtesy. Yes. What would children wear? Well, we could go on about
that
that.
depends on the decade, yeah.
Yeah, and it also depends on how old you are.
For a long time, little boys and little girls are dressed identically.
Yeah, up until about age 5.
Little girls will wear shorter skirts for much of history, just because they're active. And they're a little young to be teaching them, what to do with their skirts. When you hit when
About 15 or 16.
15 or
of course
16,
it comes out.
and you start wearing your corset at a very young age. But the length of the skirt goes down, and your hair at some point will be put up. Right, generally not before you're married, if you're married. But after that, your hair comes up, you start wearing a little linen cap around the house up until about the 70s. I think the 70s is when that goes up.
And then the boys wear knee pants until they're about between 16 and 18. Or out in the countryside, they just wear their pants, which just get shorter and shorter and shorter as they grow. And that's also something you see with girls. They will have the same dress for a couple of years. And so this dress that was down to here is now here, because the girl has grown with the same dress. And I'm talking about 90% of Americans are not very well to do. And for example, most women had 2 dresses, and they weren't fashionable. They were what were called wrappers, what we might call a prairie dress. And they had this year's dress that they wore to church, and last year's dress that they milked the cows in. And the little girls had 1 or 2 dresses that that they wore until they either were rags or they just completely outgrew them. All right, thank you very much.